In a quiet wooden house in medieval Japan, something was alive and breathing. Not fire, not incense, but vinegar. Born from rice, mountain water, and time itself, it began as sweetness, turned to wine, and finally surrendered to acidity, a silent alchemy guided by air. Its fragrance drifted through bamboo screens like a prayer of patience. In every drop, the Japanese found a truth. Nature completes what humans begin. In medieval Japan, vinegar, kyosas, was more than a seasoning. It was a quiet guardian of food, health, and ritual. Long before refrigeration or modern preservatives, vinegar was the invisible line between freshness and decay. It transformed the fragile world of fish and rice into dishes that could survive time. In the kitchens of Kyoto and Kamakura, housewives would drizzle vinegar over freshly caught fish, letting its gentle acidity protect the flesh from the heat and the air. From this habit was born narizushi, the ancient ancestor of sushi, where fish was wrapped in rice and fermented until the flavors fused into a single harmony of salt, sourness, and umami. Beyond food, vinegar lived in medicine chests. Physicians prescribed it to ease digestion, cool the body in fever, and cleanse wounds. Mixed with herbs, it became a tonic believed to purify both the stomach and the spirit. Monks drank diluted vinegar during fasting, believing it cleansed the soul as much as the flesh. Even the samurai respected vinegar's quiet power. They wiped armor with it before battle to prevent rust, a gesture that mirrored purification before a shrine. In the slow rhythm of Japanese life, vinegar was a daily ritual of preservation and patience, symbolizing balance between life's sweetness and its inevitable sourness. Every brew began with humility, just rice, water, and waiting. The Japanese rice vinegars of the medieval era were born from purity, not abundance. Farmers used short-grain rice, sometimes polished, sometimes brown, cooked gently until it released a soft aroma of sweetness. The rice was then left to cool naturally, allowing the invisible life of the air to draw near. Water came next, not any water, but spring or well water so clean that it mirrored the sky. Iron or minerals could disrupt the flavour, so brewers often used wooden buckets or clay pots to keep the water's taste untouched. No chemicals, no artificial starters, only wild yeast and bacteria floating in the gentle air of the countryside. In those days, fermentation was a conversation between man and nature. The brewer's task was not to force transformation, but to invite it. Patience became the most essential ingredient. Rice vinegar was never rushed. It asked for silence, time, and trust. Because the truest taste could not be commanded, it had to arrive on its own. To create vinegar, one must first create life, and then let it die beautifully. The journey began with cooked rice, now cooled and ready to be reborn. Into this humble bowl, the brewer mixed koji, rice infused with Aspergillus oryzae, a sacred mold cultivated in Japan for centuries. This was the soul of transformation. As the mixture rested for 2 to 3 days, invisible chemistry unfolded. The mold broke down the rice's starch into sugars, releasing a faintly sweet, earthy scent. The brewers described this moment as the rice beginning to speak. It was the whisper before fermentation's music. Then pure water was poured in, and the mixture was left to ferment longer, sometimes weeks, as wild yeasts began their work. The sugars turned to alcohol, giving birth to sakemoto, the base of rice wine. During this stage, the aroma shifted from sweet porridge to fragrant sake, warm and slightly sharp. This was not yet vinegar, but it was its heartbeat. Without sweetness, there could be no sourness. Without life, no decay. The Japanese understood this duality, that each stage of fermentation mirrored human existence, youth, ripening, and surrender. When the brew reached the perfect balance of fragrance and warmth, it was ready for its next teacher, the wind. The transformation from wine to vinegar was not achieved by hands, but by air. The freshly brewed sake was poured into thick ceramic jars known as tetsubachi, their wide mouths left open to the world. Here, in the stillness of wooden rooms, nature joined the process. The air of rural Japan carried a quiet army of ascetic bacteria. Kurozu no kaze, the black vinegar wind, as villagers called it. These unseen travellers descended upon the surface of the sake, feeding on alcohol and turning it slowly into acid. Days later, a thin, shimmering skin appeared, the sunohana, or vinegar flower. This delicate film marked the birth of a new life. To touch it was forbidden. Even the slightest disturbance could destroy it. The brewer watched in silence, knowing that what was happening inside the jar was beyond human control. The process was as poetic as it was scientific. Air, once the destroyer of freshness, became the master of creation. The sack, surrendering itself to the wind, began its transformation into vinegar, a lesson in humility and patience. In this sacred partnership between rice, water, and air, the Japanese saw not just chemistry, but a philosophy, that nature teaches through decay, and creation is born through letting go. Vinegar did not rush to completion. It matured like a memory. Once the sack had opened itself to the wind, the brewer sealed its fate not with a lid, but with patience. The jars were left to rest for 60 to 90 days, sometimes longer if winter air was cold and dry. Inside each jar, the surface shimmered under the Sunohana, that thin, living membrane where transformation happened breath by breath. The brewer would listen, not with ears but with instinct. A faint bubbling, a soft sigh of air rising from the clay. Those were signs of life unfolding in silence. Temperature and humidity were not controlled by machines, but by intuition. If the air grew too warm, the brewer opened the sliding doors to let the mountain breeze cool the jars. If it grew too cold, straw mats were placed around them like blankets. Every adjustment was small, human, and tender. To stir too much was to break the harmony. Stillness, the brewers said, is the companion of sourness. The acid developed best in calm, no shaking, no sudden changes. The entire process was like a meditation. The human hand retreated and time became the true craftsman. When the aroma changed, no longer sharp with alcohol but mellow, round, and faintly sweet sour, they knew the vinegar had ripened. The vinegar's home was as important as its recipe. The fermentation jars, called tetsubachi, were made from thick pottery fired in wood kilns. Their weight and porous texture allowed the brew to breathe slowly. Each jar was placed on bamboo stands or straw mats, raised from the damp ground to avoid mould. Light and air were carefully balanced. Too much sunlight would kill the delicate bacteria. Too little would slow the process to stillness. Thus, the ideal place was a dimly lit wooden room, quiet, shaded, and alive with the scent of earth and rice. This space was known as the suya, the house of vinegar. Within it, time seemed to move differently. Dust floated in golden beams. The air was heavy but clean. Here, craftsmen worked in near silence, their steps soft, their gestures deliberate. Every sound, the creak of the floor, the faint hiss of fermentation, became part of the ritual. All the tools were natural. Wooden ladles carved from hinoki cypress, bamboo strainers, linen cloths. Metal was avoided because it could corrupt the taste. The entire process was an act of respect, for the material, for the air, and for the unseen life blooming in each jar. In these quiet rooms, vinegar was not manufactured. It was raised like a living being. If one entered the suya during fermentation, the senses would awaken to a symphony of the unseen. There was a faint fizzing sound, delicate, irregular, like raindrops on paper. It was the whisper of ascetic bacteria consuming alcohol, breathing life into acid. To the untrained ear, silence. To the brewer, a living heartbeat. The smell told more than any clock. At first it was sharp and alcoholic, filling the room with a heady sweetness. Gradually it softened into something rounder, a blend of rice, clay, and morning dew. Each day the air thickened with this quiet perfume, signalling that transformation was underway. Brewers never relied on instruments. They relied on their senses. Eyes for the subtle colour shift, nose for the fragrance, fingers for the warmth of the jar's surface. An experienced maker could tell if the vinegar was awake or asleep just by breathing the air around it. Some said vinegar making trained the soul as much as the senses. It taught attentiveness, humility, and surrender. Inside those wooden walls, the act of listening became spiritual. To hear the microscopic, to smell time passing, to feel nature's rhythm inside clay and rice. Every sound, every scent was a dialogue between human patience and microbial will. And in that dialogue, Japan's philosophy of harmony with nature was distilled drop by drop. When the vinegar's aroma deepened into perfect balance, the time for silence ended, and the ritual of refinement began. The brewers gently poured the liquid through hemp or linen cloths, filtering away the cloudy residues and the spent vinegar flour. The goal was not to strip the soul of the liquid, but to let its clarity emerge naturally. Next came the heating. The filtered vinegar was warmed slowly in clay or earthen pots, just enough to stabilize its living acids without killing its character. The rising steam filled the room with a scent both sour and sweet, a closing note to months of patient waiting. Once cooled, the vinegar was poured into small glazed jars, sealed with layers of beeswax or wooden stoppers. These containers preserved its purity and allowed a soft aging process to continue in the dark. Each batch was judged not by acidity or strength, but by yasashisa, gentleness. The finest vinegar did not sting the tongue, it caressed it, leaving a round, calm aftertaste. In the end, preservation was not only for food, it was for balance. Through each filtered drop, medieval Japan captured a taste of time itself, humble, fragrant, and eternal. In medieval Japan, vinegar was never just a flavour, it was a philosophy of purity. It appeared not only in kitchens, but in temples, baths, and battlefields. Every use reflected the Japanese belief that cleansing the body was inseparable from cleansing the spirit. Samurai used vinegar to polish their armour and disinfect their wounds after battle. The sour scent became, for some, the smell of survival, a reminder that life itself required preservation. Monks, during long periods of fasting, mixed a few drops of vinegar with water to sustain clarity of mind. They believed that the sharp taste reminded them of impermanence, of the fleeting line between sweetness and decay. In noble households, vinegar had a ceremonial place. It was mixed with herbs and sprinkled before the hearth to purify a home after illness or death. Women, too, found beauty in it. Diluted rice vinegar was used to rinse hair, leaving it soft and glimmering under lantern light. Even in tea ceremonies and purification rites, vinegar appeared as an invisible participant, a symbol of balance, humility, and transformation. It was said that vinegar represented hakanai mono, the fragile things, teaching that beauty, like fermentation, comes from surrender to time. Thus, vinegar was not merely consumed, it was lived with. It shaped habits, rituals, and the quiet rhythm of medieval Japanese existence. Rice vinegar was the slow poetry of Japan, a quiet conversation between earth, air, and human patience. It reminded people that creation does not demand force, only faith. The villagers who brewed vinegar were not alchemists but caretakers, guiding a natural process with humility. In each drop of vinegar lay a story: the sun that ripened the rice, the mountain spring that gave its clarity, the wind that carried invisible life. Together, they embodied the Japanese belief that harmony comes not from control but from coexistence. To make vinegar was to practice shizukesa, stillness. It taught that transformation, like wisdom, ripens in silence. The brewer learned to step back, to trust decay as part of life's cycle, to see beauty even in what once spoiled. From grain to wine to acid, the process mirrored existence itself: sweetness, vitality, and surrender. What began as rice ended as essence. In the medieval world, vinegar preserved fish and vegetables, but in spirit it preserved something far greater: the understanding that time, left to breathe, turns the ordinary into the sacred.